I'm admitting all. We've got some folks here. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. I'm Carolina Wheat, and tonight for the Artfare Thursday series, live studio visits and interviews, we have Megan Cotts. Welcome, Megan.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to have you. I've been noticing a lot during my reviews of the recordings that sometimes going and enumerating all of the accolades and credentials that one has prior to the interview is really boring. Although I try not to read it. I think, you know, I know that you're represented by Cloud and Man. You've had quite a few solo exhibitions there. And one of my other favorite fun facts is that you were born and raised in New York, but you now live in LA. And the other thing that I hope to talk a little bit about today is that you graduated from CalArts.
I did. Yep.
And did you graduate and then stay in LA, Megan?
I did a lot of back and forth. So born in New York, Manhattan. And moved to Los Angeles when I was in high school, moved back to New York for undergrad, stayed in New York for a while, floundered around, moved back to LA, moved back, so back and forth a bunch, and then ended up coming back to Los Angeles for my MFA at CalArts, and yeah, ended up staying here.
Nice. It just kept you that Valencia sunshine, or yeah, it's in Valencia, correct?
It's in Valencia. Part of what I think maybe a lot of people feel this way about graduate school MFA programs, but they really, that you really build community when you're there. And so that was definitely something that happened to me. And I was part of some collaborative projects that we formed during school that were kind of able to bridge that kind of transition to after MFA, and so we are all still here. We're all still here, all still making work together and sometimes separately. And yeah, it was a good experience. It's so important to have that. And I, so that,
well, I was going to say that I know you're an educator as well, and yet you're still very active in your practice, which I've always really enamored by. Sometimes it's such an investment to teach that your own creative process kind of falls by the wayside, and you're giving to the students whom you love, and great teachers care almost too much, right?
Yeah.
But the fact is, when kind of thinking about gaining or earning your master's degree and your bachelor's degree, it comes with a certain, these are your peers at this point when you're in school or whatever, but then they're your future colleagues. They become your colleagues, and that kind of network begins within the educational facility, and certainly even after school when you create, you take from that community, or you leave that community and you're like, forget this, I'm going to jump over the pond or wherever you're going to go, and continue to make a community still with folks that are like-minded. I'm just letting folks still in. Well, one of the things I was so attracted about your work and your practice is this really fantastic minimalism and presence within this relief wall-based work. It's such a tactile, with the honeycomb series, and now these pluralist series, as you're referring them to. They're just really fantastic, and I was hoping to learn a little bit more about this most recent body of work that we see on Artfare, and in your most recent solo shows.
Yeah. So the most recent work is actually, I have one of them up here. This was actually the first one that I ever made. So this was I want to say this is the prototype, and I became pretty attached to it. So I ended up holding on to it. And this is kind of, I was hoping you would ask about this piece actually, because I have been doing a lot of thinking about over quarantine. I've been doing a deep dive, a deep unpacking, a deep thinking, a deep questioning. I mean, it's just felt like a little bit of a quest time for me. And so kind of trying to go back to this work, because it always felt like the way that I was talking about it at the time didn't ring exactly right. You know, I felt like I would, you know, kind of get in these conversations with, you know, my gallerist or with people who are interested in the work, and I was expressing myself, but in the past couple weeks, I've really had some like breakthroughs in terms of the way that I'm kind of coming back to this work. So it really started, I think that kind of like the seeds to this body of work come from the time that I was in Berlin for about a year, doing research on the Honeycomb project. So that was a project that really, where I was doing a lot of research about my father's side of the family. And so kind of going to archives there in Berlin, in Halle, which is about 30 minutes south of Berlin. And so digging up documents and doing interviews with people to research kind of their factories. And while I was there, I was in a residency, an artist residency in Berlin, and I started talking with a woman who wanted to take me on these architectural tours of Berlin, these kind of walking architectural tours. Yeah, she said, you know, you need to see this. She's like, I know that they're not related, but I'm relating your work to this architecture, so you need to see the architecture. And so we went on these walks to talk about this architecture that she was really interested in. And it was all the ways in which, you know, facades started kind of popping up in ways to change the architecture according to whatever new political structure was kind of in the moment, right? So sometimes it's just about kind of taking a new surface and, you know, and spreading it over, and it looks more solid than it is, right? It's effective in the way that it kind of changes our perspective of the architecture, but it doesn't have a lot of depth, if you know what I mean. And so I always wanted to play with that idea. I always wanted to work with it, so it kind of stayed in my mind. I went around, I took pictures of these architectural sites, and then simultaneously, I was like trying to start a family when I was in Berlin. I just met my husband. We had eloped, we went to Vegas, we got married, we moved to Berlin together. It was really dreamy. And I was like, let's start a family. And I started having like fertility issues. I started realizing that I had fertility issues. And when I kind of was realizing the past couple of weeks that, like, I don't know for anybody who's had fertility struggles, it can be such a traumatic experience. My fertility struggles have lasted, you know, since then. I have 2 beautiful children, but I came to them.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Through a lot, you know, it was a lot of pain, you know, a lot of sorrow, a lot of anger, a lot of these feelings. And so this new work, this new body of work, or new-ish body of work, is a way to talk about, for me, it's a way to talk about fertility. It's a way to talk about the body, and its kind of it's, you know, its disappointments, its fragilities, its strengths, right? So these pieces are made by building up wooden frames underneath, and then taking like and really stretching the linen over the wood until it almost kind of like pops through, and then painting that surface with these mediums that I kind of develop in the studio. And this one has glass, ground up glass in the medium. So it's kind of like, it's a paint that's like, it's almost a tempera base. So it's this like, I try and get it as matte as possible. And then it has this ground glass in it. And then it's like, it's very like light absorbent.
It's also shimmery then, wouldn't
and it's more, I want to say it's more about the texture than it is really about the shimmer. And it almost looks like concrete. So it has that kind of like, it looks really solid, but in fact it's super, super thin, right? Like the surface is super thin. So kind of trying to talk about this idea of like the architecture of the body, the architecture of this kind of the desire for a shape change to take place in kind of one's own body, and then how that related to these stories that this woman was telling me about kind of regime change and trying to change the surface of architecture and buildings.
Yeah, there's so many things to unpack there, Megan. One of my favorite ideas in your work, certainly something that I want to talk more about, you hinted on, is this epigenetic idea of the genome having been somehow affected by traits, not so much by physicality, but by traits of an emotional surrounding or an emotional experience. And if you think about your challenges with fertility and becoming pregnant versus the idea of building the skeletal structure of these works to have, you know, these strong bones, like going to see a house and every real estate agent's going to tell you it's got good bones, got strong bones, you know, yet the bones aren't exactly biologically what makes a great body or painting, for instance, or the frame of the painting. And so it's these softer layers, these visceral areas within the painting that kind of come over the skeleton, and then the canvas comes over the frame and is able to really speak to that which is under. Like, for instance, kind of like making the invisible visible.
Yeah, right. Revealing something about what's underneath. Mm-hmm. And then also, I think, in a sense, like the process of healing, and at the same time, like that self-healing practice, right, of kind of needing to kind of smooth and kind of cover and embrace kind of what's underneath at the same time, kind of to make whole, right, is kind of in there as well.
Right. And yet it's so neatly confined within this square or within, you know, geometric shapes that are repeated. And one of my questions was just like, you're building your own structures here, correct? Like, you're in a wood shop, like, you know, using the jigsaw, doing your thing, bandsaw, whatever you're using. And then does the canvas matter, or does the wood matter that you use in your process?
I would say the canvas matters a lot. The wood hasn't yet. The canvas, I'm such a kind of like a textile junkie. Like I love fabrics. And so, and then, you know, in that way that I'm also kind of like an archivist and collector and, you know, shall we call it hoarder? I started out, you know, this country is I don't know if we want to get into this. This country is really bad at making like beautiful fabrics, as far as I'm concerned. Once you kind of leave this country, you can find, I think, like very beautiful, you know. So I used to go when I was abroad, like in, you know, when I was in a residency in France, and I would find like in junk shops these beautiful linen, you know, bed sheets, and so I would collect them and take them home. And I find that those like really older, kind of really strong textiles work really well for my process, whether or not that is part of those earlier fabric pieces that I was making, the ones that are the honeycomb fabric work. So those,
the pleats and the structure of those are so textile savvy, I suppose you would say. You know, the heavier linens and canvases you're using, it's not so easy to manipulate. Did you take any courses in, dare I say, fashion, but like textiles or otherwise? You just kind of learned how to work with that fabric with experimentation?
yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I tried weaving for a minute, and I don't really have the patience for weaving, but I do kind of have, I think once the fabric is already, I just kind of picked it up myself.
Awesome. Could you show some of our viewers these honeycombs you're referring to? I know you share real quickly.
Yeah, let's see. Oh, it's gonna take me to the it's gonna take me to the Zoom page. But can you see that?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. So here is, this is this is an earlier piece. This is one of kind of the early pieces. And so this piece is from a project that came out of the project that I was doing in Berlin, the Honeycomb Project, which really covers a number of different shows and a number of different types of work that I have made. The project is about a paper factory that my father's grandparents owned and ran in a town called Halle in Germany in the starting in the early 1900s and all the way up to the 1930s. And they developed that honeycomb paper, those decorations that come flat and then you open them up and they become paper decorations. Mm-hmm. So they developed kind of the first mechanized honeycomb paper machines. And so when I went to Germany, I was studying mostly their patent designs. So they filed a lot of patents for their machinery and then also for their paper designs. And I used these designs in a lot of my work. So they became a kind of an alphabet for me in terms of the way that I was presenting. And then the fabric technique was a way to kind of talk about that honeycomb paper. So here we have a honeycomb, the orange, the kind of faded yellow to orange design was from one of the patents, and then it's laid on top of the honeycomb fabric.
How is it laid then? Are you painting it with a brush or is it screened?
Painting with a brush.
Very fill.
Yeah.
And then we'll just another textiles question. Is it indigo that you're using? It's like a wet dip technique where it gradually comes up on that canvas, or?
Yeah. I wish it was indigo. I got into dyes later on. This is a pretty early piece. So I am now interested in kind of growing my own indigo and being able to develop my own dyes that are kinder to the environment and that are, but this was kind of one of those harsher, and then here we go, this is a much larger piece. This is, again, the machinery, the mechanics of the honeycomb paper factory, and then kind of laid on top of these, the fabric.
And can you maybe address also the motifs, the patterns that you're choosing to work with in line? You've got these fantastic lines overlaying the pleats of the paper, and we're understanding that it's coming from grandfathers' factories, or relatives or ancestors' factories. Yet, how are you choosing some of these design motifs?
I came up with a series of design motifs that I pulled from all of these patents. So the patents they filed were eventually nullified. They were Jewish, and they were eventually nullified by the Nazis in, I think it was 1938, was the nullification of Jewish intellectual property. So all Jewish filed patents were kind of freed from property, intellectual property rights.
Right.
And so part of part of my action was to kind of reclaim these, this information, right, as kind of the later generation, to be able to kind of go back in and say, no, this is still part of like a family legacy, heritage. I don't want to say ownership, but there's a way to kind of pick up those threads and continue them on. Pun not intended. And so I kind of collected them all together, and then I kind of pulled out the ones that I was interested in working with, and the ones that seemed the clearest to me, and then I kind of set up a bit of an alphabet, and then I did a show. Here, I'll show you. Where is it? I did a show. So this one, I put them all up. So here in the back, right here, let's get to it there, I did a silk screen, and now I'm flipping through these, but I did a silk screen project where I took all of the patents that I kind of had selected, and that became my alphabet.
That helps a lot. Fantastic. And so these are an archival reclamation, basically. And then who is Helen? Is this a grandmother or a...
No, not at all. I found this one piece in art. So the other thing about my father's family is that they collected everything. They put everything into scrapbooks. And so as part of this project, I also pulled from my father's family albums. And in one of these albums was this orange piece of paper, and on the outside it said, I love you Helen, and it said it in Spanish, English, and German. And I had been traveling to Germany, and I lived in Los Angeles, and so it seemed to make sense as this like centerpiece for the exhibition, and for these different places that I was moving through and considering. There's this whole other part of this story that has to do with the airline industry, and how the airline industry ended up picking up these patents and using them when they were, it's a little bit of like it's a little bit conspiracy theory. I ended up finding this guy in Germany who was doing his PhD on honeycomb design, and he also was studying my family, and we connected. And his idea was that the German bomber planes had used these patents and this technology to create the wings of their bomber planes.
Yikes.
Mm-hmm. And so that kind of enters this story, this airline industry kind of chapter of the story. And so then me being from Los Angeles, and this being a site of airline industry, I dug into that as kind of the next section of this project.
Mm-hmm. Well, this conspiracy sounds, I mean, at this point, the truth is stranger than fiction. I'm just noticing all your voter registration stuff also on your tab. So thank you for checking.
Yeah, I didn't realize you can see my.
I'm
I can't find my ballot.
Especially when I say truth is stranger than fiction at this point. Also, it's just, so difficult to even address at times. I'm genuinely exhausted from being overwhelmed, and I'm exhausted from outrage and all of the things, yet still trucking along. But the idea then with this genetic history, as we were talking a little bit before too, and you put very clearly in your artist statements about the epigenetics that I referenced prior, is this how you or your family hold some sort of energy, or trauma is a very heavy word. However, I do understand that there is intergenerational or transgenerational trauma from the Holocaust. There's transgenerational trauma from slavery, from indigenous peoples being overtaken by the colonialization, and so on and so forth. Yet, was finding your grandfather's archive, your family's archive, did that awaken anything? Clearly you made a body of work. Okay, so we're going there. But did it awaken anything in your body, or did you feel a kind of responsibility to address the family's history and maybe how you have carried this understanding of transgenerational trauma from the Holocaust?
Yeah. I definitely felt the calling to investigate. Yes, I went to, that kind of started it's the reason I went to Berlin, the reason I went to Germany, to kind of look into this, feeling that I did have a responsibility to kind of continue, to kind of search, to look into that moment in time, to follow the threads of the stories that, my aunts tell at Christmas time, or my father tells, that, probably prior to then I ignored, but, at some point I became interested in. And at some point I felt it became like my mission to really take this as far as I possibly could.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, trauma feels like one of those words that's so, it's so out there, it's out there, and it seems to refer to so many things, and I believe in it, and I believe in it when people kind of refer to their traumas. And I also feel like in this case, as you're kind of saying, there are layers to it, right? There are layers, and then there are ways, I'm currently kind of investigating how those earlier experiences, experiences that shape our lives, do get passed on to the next generation, and habitual movements, and in emotional strategies. Mm-hmm. And how are we going to be transferring our current experience to our children, right? Like how in us, you know, how is this going to manifest itself in our children and our children's children? So I think all of these big moments really kind of affect us long term.
Can you stop sharing your screen so we can see you a little better?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, how do we share that with our children? And whether or not we mean to, you know, and how can they can be unlearned or, you know, remove the trait, which seems so indelible at times, that which, you know, we carry with us, and we don't even know. That's what I was talking a little bit about. The invisible becomes visible. And, you know, in a lot of your structures, your more recent structures, I find them to be not only compelling aesthetically, design wise, and, you know, creatively skillful, just very thoughtful in the way that they're just not flashy. You know, they're not screaming at you. They're requiring you to approach and investigate and wonder why. And it's kind of like the empathy quotients now that we talk about as to if someone is feeling, or, you know, so cliche yet so true. We don't know someone has mental health challenges unless we really investigate, because you can't see it. And trauma, just to quick piggyback on that idea, is sometimes I think overused as a word. And although it's still valid, folks may not have experienced, you know, something that's going to create the post-traumatic stress disorder that many of our service men and women, or our people living in poverty feel. Yet every experience is justifiable, and, you know, we have to understand it's just the levels of that, which kind of also feed within the levels of which you've created these works. Some much more inviting than others. I mean, even the one behind you, it really reminds me of someone that is famished or experiencing a famine because of the way the bones are. I'm implying intention over here, right? But were you thinking of I started the conversation about those newer works. Were you thinking about that kind of viewer response at all
with these works? You know, to me, I was really interested in getting the viewer like very close to the work. I think like for these works, surface was so important to me. And so I wanted people to not feel that they had to step back, you know, that they could really get so close that they could notice all the very tiny moments that are happening, even just like the way that the fabric is folded in the corners and the way things like got tucked under. I was very kind of specific about how I was like really kind of taking care of those moments in these works. So yes, I wanted to bring people in, and even though they kind of feel a bit hard, I wanted that kind of like that pulsating kind of hard, soft moments. And so I felt that even, you know, all the things, the colors, the textures, would kind of bring people, make people feel welcome to approach.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And before discovering the work, the levity, the playfulness of these products and the papers, and, you know, Gerald Cotts, who I'm assuming is someone related to you, has mentioned that the company was Hellbraun and Pinner.
Uh-huh.
They were toys and fans occasionally. They were similar to the once popular red Christmas bells that opened from two pieces of cardboard, which you also kind of explained, but it's really giving a good visual from the other installation shot that you showed of the orange structure. The paper was very light and crepe paper. I remember growing up with those things, certainly. And I guess I also am curious about, before going to Berlin or before discovering this part of yourself, was your work at all about memory, or what was your work about? Like what were you doing? You don't have to show any pictures at all, but I'm just wondering if there was any kind of sea change in your concept.
Yeah, before that project, I was working. A lot of what I was looking at when I was at CalArts was when I first moved to Los Angeles, I started working in television commercials, in the prop department and the set dressing department, and I was running around to all the prop houses in Los Angeles, and I was looking at all of these objects, and I'm not sure if you've ever been to any of these prop houses, but they're enormous. They're multi-story. They're huge. They have hundreds and thousands of different objects. I mean, you could walk into a warehouse that's full of bed frames, right? And you just bed frames from any point in history. Any material, any era or kind of level of, opulence or, poverty. And so the idea is to build up these scenes by choosing all these different materials to place together, right? So and I got really interested in this idea of Los Angeles and the movie industry and the commercial industry. Well, specifically the commercial industry as this kind of this kind of quick way of creating these visual backdrops for the way that we're sold things, right? So the way that we're sold culture, almost in a way that's behind the action, right? So there's always a background, right? There's always a background. You always kind of choose the background, because something has to be there, right? And so how are these backgrounds informing us? How are they kind of subtly telling us about who we are, what our culture is? Oh, I think I've frozen.
I'm back.
Okay.
It said it was unstable.
Ah, gotcha.
Yeah, well, that is so awesome. Do you need a license to go into those warehouses?
No, you really don't. You can just kind of go in, and there's histories to these warehouses, and they have these pieces that were you can go and find, this, I'm sure you could find the set from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof or something. Everything is stored, all of Hollywood history is stored in these spaces, old and new, and they're incredible. Sometimes they go out of business, sometimes they burn down, and this whole rich history kind of disappears, but you don't really know that it's there. And so I got really interested in those set pieces and kind of how they are witnesses to the story that's happening in front of them, and repeated stories. So I also got really interested, when my thesis show at CalArts had to do with the two most popular objects that had been rented. So there's this one main prop house in LA. It's called Omega Cinema Props, and I went and I talked to the owner, and I said, can we figure out what the two most rented objects in your entire set of warehouses is?
I bet he doesn't have a spreadsheet of that, or did he? Or was it just by anecdote?
No, it was a combination of him being oh, well, I kind of know what gets rented a lot, and then we kind of had to sit there and do a lot of numbers. And it turned out that it was this, he had these 4 chandeliers, these 4 pretty, they're kind of medium big chandeliers that get rented all the time. And then this set of these metal cots that could be used in they were like industrial. They could be used in a prison cell.
The
They
horror
could be,
films.
right, horror films.
Images.
Yeah, exactly. So like these were the two objects. So I did a whole kind of like investigation and presentation about like those two ideas, right? About the opulence and then like the disparaged, the locked up, the kind of like our obsession with punishing each other. And
Yikes.
yeah.
It says a lot about the culture too, and the term you use to sell us. I mean, certainly all creating a narrative for, you know, whatever story is being told in Hollywood at that time.
Mm-hmm.
But the prop itself becomes so important as an object of history, but those together become even more important as you can, you know, compare and contrast what's going into the scene. Certainly, I think chronological and time is very important too for period pieces and all that stuff. Yet, I'm very fascinated and would love the next time I ever can get to LA to go to see this place, because it feels like a hoarder's dream, or someone that I always fancy and dreamed of, a superpower that was touching an object and going directly there as the object was speaking to you. It's called psychometry, and I'm still practicing today. So I would love to go there and have the object speak to me.
Yeah, I actually did another project. I think you'd like this one. So I did another project where like I would take one object and kind of like put text with it from the, like, basically have it speak to you from what it's witnessed. Right, so like the same bed frame, you know, as a framing device for kind of these scenes that they've actually witnessed, like during filming, and placing those together. Yeah.
It's still in line. In a nice you know, it's just like it's a bridge between the work that begun in your experience in Berlin. That's it's nice to know. It's interesting. And what are you then planning on anytime in the future? Or, you know, one of my questions I like to ask too, since we started these during the lockdown and still quarantine-ish right now, what, if anything, got canceled for you, or were you relying on that was just a real bummer?
Yeah. So I was really excited about this summer. I was going to spend it. I was awarded two family residencies.
That's few and far between. Nice.
I know. So there's a wonderful family supportive residency called Stoneleaf. I don't know if you've heard of it.
Of course, Helen Toomer.
Yeah.
Shout out up in upstate New York. You can come visit me in Newburgh.
Yes. Okay. So it got postponed. I'm glad it got postponed, which means that I get to go back. This summer and do that one. And then another one that supports families is called Colorworks. It's just north of there in Troy. It's the Elizabeth Mitchell residency up there. So they do a family residency. So that was going to be my wonderful upstate New York summer, making art, having my family there, and you know, a couple of kind of exhibition opportunities that ended up going online in a way that, I mean, as it happened, right, and studio space, right? I wasn't able to work really in the way that I'm used to working, with having all that space to cut wood and make a big mess and use power tools. And I've been missing that. I did, though. I'm excited about next summer because I feel like now it's all just kind of, now it's in the future. Now there's something to look forward to. And I started I think I also went down a kind of like an existential crisis. What does it mean to be an artist whole? That I led to, I mean, we could probably talk about that forever. And I think probably a lot of artists, you know, who have joined you on Thursday afternoons have talked about this.
Yeah.
But what has, you know, I want to kind of focus on what I think came out of it. And I think one of those things is this amazing thing that has happened with these artist interviews that are posted online and studio visits and just these like long form conversations with artists, which it seems to be this, at least it's new for me, way to kind of access those conversations and artist practices and studios. It feels really good to be coming at a time like this when I think the role of the artist is, for me, something I'm really looking at with a pretty critical eye.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It was an immediate creative solution, just kind of like, let's just do this.
Yeah.
So I just love it. I sharpened my teeth throughout the last 25 years working as an admissions or recruiter for different colleges, and 5 or 6 different colleges actually. One of which I almost got a position is at Cal Arts as what was it? I think it was like the dean of undergraduate admission or something, associate dean of undergraduate admission or something along the lines. And so I got to visit the campus, and it was always one of my dream schools to work at. But the point I'm trying to make is that it really sharpened my teeth talking to artists and learning about their process and asking questions and being critical. I think that, and it's not saying these talks per se are, but you know, your appreciation for having long form conversations about an artist's work that may or may not, you know, shimmy off to one way and digress in another way. And how are this is a natural and organic way to ideate and process the work that artists make, and ultimately how important that work is. Like your place as an artist speaking about your things is critical in the times that we live. I think there's no more important time for an artist than to reflect what is happening right now. And it's just been like, you know, scurrying and trying to find as many artists as I can to have the conversations. That's just me. I mean, I've been on and looking for and you know, what is it called? Like being a voyeur on so many other conversations, whether it's the art newspaper or Hyperallergics does, or Artsy's done a few, Brooklyn Rail has done a few. I mean, there's some really great shout outs to folks that are doing like the podcasts or the, you know, the content is so rich right now. And I really value that you're finding the lemonade in all of those.
Yeah, because I think that like there's a, you know, there's this way that you can kind of question the role of the artist in terms of this, you know, this kind of like enlightenment, you know, view of the personality, the artist personality, the individual artist, and I'm kind of curious about that. And so I'm interested in this idea of kind of a little bit more turning towards the collective as the kind of art makers, right? Like art generators, right? Like the creativity as kind of coming from not necessarily the, you know, the solo as coming from. And so I started I'm kind of starting small. I'm starting a project that is a correspondence project with my mom, who I was, you know, yeah, who's there, right there, I see her. So this idea of being able to kind of it does a lot of things. This project is doing a lot of things for me. One is it helped to connect us during this time when we couldn't see each other. It also allows me to kind of investigate in a similar way that I was looking at my father's side of the family. It's obviously going to be very different with my mother, and I have hesitated. I've never kind of, we don't have enough time to get into this, but I'm really, I'm daunted by and really curious about kind of working with her to make art. She's an artist. And so that's where I'm moving into this idea of being able to kind of generate a momentum that is kind of larger than myself, kind of includes more people than just myself in terms of this generating content for the work.
Yeah, exactly. It's a back and forth conversation then, as it's also memoir-esque of, you know, history seeking, ancestry seeking also in a way for your future generations. It'll be laid out a little bit right there for them to contemplate as well, which seems so relevant in line with, you know, the previous iterations of other works, and also accessibility now. So you're not in your studio, right?
Yeah, exactly.
It's a creative solution to not having that. But the thank you, thanks Maureen, thanks for being here. Thanks for all your comments too, they're really sweet. It is a really incredible project to collaborate with your mom. Ruth Freeman says she was last week. We had a lot of fun.
Oh, hi.
Yeah, the idea here that it's important to kind of spread the love, right? And are you thinking of any other collaborations with folks you're like kind of quarantine potting with, or have you been talking to other artists or engaged with other artists in your?
Yeah, I am. One of my a woman that I used to collaborate with back at CalArts, we had a collaboration called D3 for a few years. One of the members in that, there were 3 of us. She and I have a little pod going on because we both have 1.5-year-olds. So they play together, they hang out together, and we do a lot of kind of studio visits. And if we're not doing actual studio visits, we're doing mental studio visits. And
you're checking in with each other.
Checking in with each other.
It's always time.
Yeah.
Well, we've got 7 whole minutes left, and as much as I would like to go on about, you know, weird old topics, I'm wondering if any of our audience is interested in asking Megan a question about work, the process, or anything we've spoken about, really. Or even ask me a question, because if not, I'm just going to start talking about like mystics. No, I'm just kidding. Memory. Well, yeah, I did have a question while folks are kind of thinking, or maybe shy to ask, or do you think that, you know, kind of going through some of these historic, like while you were in Berlin, diving into the archives of your family, or making work or being around work, did that have any emotional or spiritual or physiological, intellectual, maybe what is the word, maybe just like was that ever a consideration for your infertility challenges?
Oh, interesting.
I don't know.
I don't think so. I think that like they just happen to happen at the same, like they happen to coincide, but I don't think so. No. and at a long time, for a long time, it was just kind of like they were just existing separately. Like this was literally, I think it was like 2 weeks ago when I was kind of thinking about us having this conversation. And I think I just let myself really like sink back into that time that I was making that work, and kind of going back to like trying to answer these questions, or like trying to really like feel comfortable and kind of get to the root of it. And I think that they just happen to be parallel, like parallel in time and not necessarily really linked up. I think that like I kept them very separate until a certain point came, and then it kind of like overflowed, and I had to address, these other things that were happening to me, personally. So this feels like super personal work, super kind of like contemporary work that doesn't kind of rely on these like larger historical structures. It doesn't really rely on like the interaction between myself and like a body of information, or like information that's coming from these other people, which I like, like I sit very well within these kind of structures that I create from the information that I gather, right? Like that is my comfort zone, not necessarily like my own personal experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been, I don't know what it is with the last months and months.
Yeah.
I've been having dreams of having a small child again, and that's just not going to happen. 46 and just not gonna, I'm not going there, pretty much because I physiologically cannot go there any longer. But I have been having these dreams, and in some dream, kind of therapy slash, understanding the symbolism within your dreams and all this good, not just Freudian stuff, but, really asking myself what the hell's going on. Because, and it's always about a project. It's always about what am I working on right now that I see to fruition, and how can I make that project the best child, in other words, and
absolutely
analogously to my work, that I can. So I ask that question more as like, as artists and female artists, or, folks that have the ability to sometimes bear children. It's often about creating and producing something which may be feeling very different than from other experiences, and letting something go, selling something, watching it grow up and become its own. I always love thinking about these analogies to the work that we create. So there's.
Yeah, it's true. I definitely have. I mean, I definitely have the birthing projects.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, at least they're not the period projects anymore.
Exactly. But I wonder that, I mean, that's interesting. You never think that anybody else shares those experiences with you, right? Mm-hmm. But yeah, the quarantine dreams, oof.
Yeah, that's the whole nother.
Heavy, yeah. I keep having them too. I mean, they just don't stop.
They're really, they're great. I've been writing them down religiously, really just not going to let go of that. I was like, if there's anything that I can do right now to record the history we're living in, it's the wackadoodle stuff that's going on in this reality slash that a more preferred reality right now, maybe.
Maybe.
Seeing underwater castles and, all sorts of underground beaches. Anyway, we have approached our time, as I thought we would, very easily talk more. Megan, it's been such a pleasure to speak with you tonight. And just, I know you're tapped in from LA, so you're 3 hours behind. So I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I really appreciate you sharing a lot of personal stuff here tonight.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I was so red. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna bring it, because it's like, yeah, as you know, I think as so many things happen when you get into conversations during this time, that's something else, that's something else that's happening. It's like
Yeah,
a lot of,
I really cannot wait to see your work IRL again. And I wish you the best with the project with Maureen. And certainly we'll be on the lookout for more work from you on Artfare otherwise. And the work is just so stunning, both online and I'm sure even more in real life, as usual. Well, and next week we have Rose Nestler. And if you missed any of this interview, you can stay tuned to our YouTube channel where I will put it up in the next few days and you'll be able to hear the whole thing. Thank you again, Megan, and thanks everyone for joining. Yeah. Peace out. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Absolutely.